Hey guys, so the good news is that there's some really great tools out there to help with joint mobility and help your joints be healthy for the long term. And these tools you can use for joint-specific warm-ups and self-assessment. And you can do that at the same exact time to maximize your time and efforts, which is great. These tools were developed and they're based on existing sports medicine research and principles. So they're very safe and effective. We just have to start using them. We have to start implementing this into our culture, at our gyms, and into our own routines. So self-assessment of your joint is really, pick a joint, is really important for planning your workout. So if you can be assessing your joint while you're doing a warm-up, that gives you a lot of really good information for you to decide what's going to be safe and appropriate for you to do for skills for that day. It's also useful information for you to be able to share with your instructor to help them understand the status of your body so that they can work with you and help modify things, or so that you can let them know that you might not be able to do as many of a skill or a certain skill that day because your joints are a little bit cranky. So by using these tools and being smart about training, then we're nipping things in the bud. We're not irritating things more that are already cranky. We're letting them heal, and that will allow us to continue to participate in the movement activities and not really irritate things so much that it makes us have to sit out and take time off to let that heal. So these are really good to nip things in the bud, which is useful. And the way to kind of get started, or a good way to get started with these that I like to tell my students, is to just think of doing the big three. Start with just incorporating the big three: shoulder, spine, hip. Those are major joints that are involved in most sports skills and movement activities. So if you can start learning that and incorporating that, you're going to be so much better off. So I'll walk you through a quick overview of what some of those things look like and why, and they might at first glance seem like something you already do, but when I explain how much more intentional it is and the way that we do it for the Kinstretch approach, you'll start to see some of the differences of what it is. And if you want more information on CARs, I have a bunch of information on my YouTube channel for Cultivate Movement, so you can go there and look at the CARs and follow along and give it a try and start incorporating it in. You could also consider taking a Kinstretch class, because you will definitely learn CARs in Kinstretch classes, so those are good places to start. So I like to start with SCAP CARs. So the key thing here about CARs, controlled articular rotations, they're joint circles, but they're done very intentionally, and they're done so that they cover each aspect of a joint range of motion. A lot of other warm-ups I see aren't very intentional, and there are a lot of flopping around, and they're not really making sure that you cover the entire range of motion of a joint. So in order to properly warm up, you really need to make sure you hit all those nook and crannies in the entire range of motion. And that'll get your joint better prepared for the activity by hitting all of those. And if you're just sitting at a desk over here, you're not hitting your full range of motion. You have to really be intentional about that in your warm-up. So we can look at SCAP CARs, so your shoulder blades. A lot of times people just focus on the up and down when your shoulder blades do a lot more. Working on the SCAP CARs helps you learn the strength and control of that joint. It helps train that as well. And that's important for things like the SCAP, because the SCAP needs to work properly to take stress off the shoulder. If the SCAP isn't able to move and it doesn't have a lot of strength and control, it can really start to create problems for the shoulder. So I'll flip around so you can actually look, in case you're a visual learner like I am. I like to kind of see what's going on, and then you might be able to see the difference of what I'm doing than some other types of warm-ups, and you'll see why this works really well. You can do SCAP CARs both shoulders at the same time, or if some people sometimes have one side that's really cranky, so sometimes you might want to do it one shoulder at a time or one SCAP at a time to really focus a lot of attention to that one side to make sure that you're controlling and go through. You'll get a whole lot more out of really focusing attention on that. So for the SCAP CARs, so here we just think about we're coming up into elevation, and then we'll slow and controlled transition to retraction, and then slow and controlled, and don't just drop, transition down to depression. and then forward to protraction, back up to elevation, and then usually reverse direction. And then there's a couple of variations and progressions off of those gap cars. We're doing them in different arm positions and different other challenges. So you can take these as a warm-up, and then you can also progress them to make them more of a training tool. So by learning them, you're opening yourself up to a nice world of tools. Shoulder capsule cars. So to create a really healthy shoulder joint, you need to have some adequate shoulder internal rotation and external rotation. But you can also use that principle as a good warm-up for your joint. That gets into the deep joint for a warm-up, and then you can warm up more of the superficial layers after that. So we typically do it from here, but if this position is painful or pinchy on your shoulders, you can certainly do it down here. If up here is pinchy or cranky, then that's a sign. You already started your self-assessment. So any activities over here, you might want to reconsider your plan for training stuff out here if you're starting to get some pain and pinching in your shoulders, because you don't want to make that worse. So it might be something where you train some stuff down here and see what limits some of the overhead stuff until you've cleared this up and got this to a better place. Cars will help with that. So for the shoulder capsule cars, I just come back into shoulder external rotation, find my full end range, hold for a second or two, and then I come back into internal rotation, and same thing, hold for a second or two. So I'm taking that through my full internal rotation, external rotation, which is really useful. Doing that before the full shoulder cars might clear out some sticky stuff and make the full shoulder cars a little bit more comfortable and accessible. So example of shoulder cars looks like this. Palm up, straight elbow, stabilize the body, stabilize everything, because you are really just working on moving the shoulder. The spine should not be helping out, nothing else is happening. That's how you know you're warming up the shoulder. If you're doing a warm-up where a lot of stuff is moving, it's hard to really get intentional and work one area. Some of that full body stuff can come after you've already warmed up the specific joints. So we come across here, come up to the top, so that goes through the adduction up to the flexion. So sometimes people come up into flexion and they start to feel pain and pinching. So if I was supposed to be doing trapeze beats today and I can't bring my shoulder flexion more than here because of pain and pinching, then trapeze beats might not be an appropriate activity for me to do that day. I might need to work on some shoulder mobility to clear that up first. Otherwise that could get irritated. I need to be more up here to be able to do trapeze beats. Okay, and then rotate pinky towards the back, come around to, so we've already done some internal external rotation here, and now we're coming around abduction and back to shoulder extension. And then lower down, push back, and then rotate them up, come around into abduction again, back up to flexion, and we're still going through some internal external rotation as we're doing that, and back down. So we've gone through all the range of motions of the shoulder, so now we know that that shoulder has been warmed up. And we've been able to screen to see if there's any pinching or any pain points. So you would, if there were any pinching pain, you would back off of that so that you don't have any pain and pinching and do your car. And that'll help your cranky shoulder as well. So that's the shoulder cars, and that's something where I would do like at least 2 reps on each side. Cat-cow. So there's a way to make cat-cow much more intentional and specific, so you therefore get a lot more out of it and it adequately warms up your spine. I see a lot of times folks really rush through cat-cow and they're not being very intentional. You really want to be segmental and try to work through the whole spine. If you don't do that, then you just end up working the parts that are already bendy and you're not really able to give attention to the parts that really need it. So slow down. And I have to tell myself, slow down. And then I'm like, even slower than you think is slow. And then you're usually at the right pace. So starting in cat, I really try to maximize spinal extension all the way from butt to the head. I start there, I find my end range and see what that feels like today. And then I now carefully, in a pain-free, pinch-free range, I now will go into a posterior pelvic tilt. I'll tuck my hips under, and then I put a hand up here to really give me some feedback and cueing. So I go into lumbar flexion. I start to push up against my hand, and then I'm slowly working that flexion up each segment of my spine, because I know there's some areas in here that are a little bit tighter and limited, and if I rush through, I'm going to miss that completely. And then I'm coming up through, and then I tuck my ribs under for thoracic flexion, which again, if you don't really cue yourself and really pay attention to that, you could miss it easily, and that's something that's really useful in a lot of skills. Head drops last, and then I untuck and go into an anterior pelvic tilt, and then I start to really push my abs forward. I really want to find, again, I want to maximize this range of motion so I get through all of it. And I'm pushing forward, pushing my ribs forward, which helps activate my extension. And then here, I want to push my chest forward to get some thoracic extension. A lot of folks miss out on that. And that's a part that a lot of us need. And then head comes up last. And then from here, working our way down to the third part, which is hip. You can do hip capsule cars here, just like I did for shoulder. Same idea. So I can drive from my hip, contract, and try to bring my foot to the outside. That's internal rotation. And I stop when my spine starts to help, because my intention is just focusing on the hip. Pause for 2 seconds, and then I come back towards the midline. I lift up to go over the other side. Now I'm going into hip external rotation. I stop when my spine starts to help, or if I have pain and pinching, I stop. That's my end range. And then I hold that for a second or two, and then I come back out. Okay, and then you can, of course, do that on their side, and you could do it a couple of times. So that's really nice to do before hip cars. So hip cars look kind of easy, but they're not, especially if you're doing them correctly without compensations. So what a hip car looks like is, for this position, is you take your knee and you bring it up towards your wrist into hip extension, and then you come out to the side to hip abduction, trying not to rotate the spine. Rotate knee down, foot up for internal rotation. Squeeze that glute to try to not lose height. Some people end up dropping here. You really want to have strength and control here. Squeeze that glute as you come back into extension. Slowly lower down. And then squeeze the glute to lift up. So a lot of folks, if they don't pay attention to doing this, they end up really arching the spine and trying to use that. Here we just want to use the glutes for extension. That's true hip extension. So glutes go into extension. Rotate knee up, foot down for external rotation, come back to abduction, and then back up to flexion. And there's progressions. So I would do that a second time on that side, and then of course do the other side. And there's progressions to cars. But you gotta get good at the foundation, at the basics, so that you have awareness and see where you might have areas that are a little bit more limited, or find out if you have any areas that have pain or pinching that you might need to do some deeper work on to clear that up first before you progress. A lot of people have pinching in their hip that they continue to ignore, and that's a sign that your body's telling you about something. So that gives you a little bit of an overview. Definitely check out my YouTube channel, because there's some videos on there. I also go through some spine cars. There's additional ones on there. So check it out and let me know if you have any questions.